Well, thanks for joining in again today, folks. As more and more people do tune into Stockwell Day-to-Day news to get the behind-the-scenes things that you will not really hear or see about the main stories in mainstream media, and hopefully will help you understand some of the competing forces at work at home and abroad. Very interesting development over the weekend related to the Russia-Ukraine situation. Here we have the tiny country of Moldova, 2.6 million people, very poor country. And in their elections, they voted for a very pro-EU government, which is a real pushback against Russia, of course. So Moldova is surrounded on three sides by Ukraine itself and Romania on the other side. As the strategy of Putin has been over the last couple of decades to get a percentage of Russian population into areas of some of these countries where they can kind of claim almost an independent state within a state. So in Moldova, there is a little region, and it's called Transnistria. It has nothing to do with the trans movement. It's just what it's called. And in that particular area, there is a high Russian population, but compared to the overall population of Moldova, it's only about 7%. So this is seen as another gain of strength, another political signal in terms of the EU against Russia and pro-Ukraine, especially considering if Moldova ever went Russia, if we can use that term, it could be a real channel, a transportation channel for military and other purposes. Very interesting election there, and Putin will not be happy with it. Ukraine, of course, very happy with the results there. On another situation that's developed, and you may or may not see this in some of the mainstream media, but this is huge. There's been news now from China that they've made a major development, major breakthrough in terms of fusion research, and it's to do with what's called these magnetic fields. So without going into all the depth of the difference between fission and fusion, what's happened is there's been, for decades, countries racing towards trying to crack the code for nuclear fusion, which if you picture nuclear fission being a atomic bomb going off and destroying everything all around it, picture nuclear fission as being a way to keep all that energy inside a particular power plant. You need a huge magnetic field to be able to do that. And China has just announced, and it's been confirmed just over the weekend, they have set an all-time record for developing a magnetic field that will contain and keep inside a particular power plant this whole process of fission and fusion. So it's moving towards fusion and a real breakthrough. Add to that the fact that Russia controls so much of the rare earth minerals. You see a real potential tilt in terms of power here. If China can move ahead and really control the area of development of nuclear fusion, breaking any of their dependency on oil and gas or natural gas from other countries, it really gives them a big step forward in terms of production, in terms of development of AI. It's just huge. There are similar developments in other countries, but China's made a real breakthrough here. So let's watch and see what happens. The positive story of this is that nuclear fusion is in fact becoming a reality. It's within reach. Some people are saying, some experts are saying, as early as 2030, maybe 2035, we will see significant amount of energy development coming from these nuclear fusion plants. So China with a significant leg up here, but overall could be a benefit on the emission side globally if these breakthroughs can really happen. And people are saying, well, does this mean an end to oil and gas companies? Well, no, because of course those of the smarter ones in that group, Chevron internationally and actually Cenovus in Canada, are invested heavily also in nuclear fusion research. China making a big leap forward there. And looking at LIBS, there's a lot of discussion going on right now because in the U.S., and I know Canadians and people in other countries kind of scratch their head when we hear about the U.S. government possibly shutting down because of these funding and budgetary considerations. This time, ironically, it's the Democrats that are pushing for the shutdown. Normally what happens in a case like this, the Democrats and Republicans get together and they vote and they just say, you know, we're going to just continue. It's called a continuing resolution. We'll figure out the debt and the deficit later, but we got to keep the lights on across the country. And so usually at the 11th hour, they vote to have a continuing resolution and deal with the deficit problems later. This time, the Democrats are saying, no, we are willing to shut down government because they want to see more in terms of healthcare funding and a couple of other essential areas. This is broadly being seen by strategists on the left and the right as they're kind of wondering about this move from the Democrats, because any time in the past, whichever party has been seen as responsible for the shutdown, they're the ones that pay the price in the midterm elections. The last time there was a significant price to be paid, it was the Republicans getting blamed. They were the ones who forced the shutdown. And the broader public, all they know is that services are being shut down. They usually pick the national parks as the first area to get hit, and then other areas. So it's a high-risk strategy here by the Democrats, and some people are thinking it's going to give a boost to President Trump because it will allow him to bring in executive orders, more power to the White House, to the presidency, to just keep the lights on around the country. Interesting moves. Part of the reasoning is the Democrats are losing out on the broader social debates. They don't have somebody who they can coalesce behind as a leader yet, though of course they will. But because they're losing on some of the broader debates, the question of gender and other social issues, this one is looking a bit of a head scratcher for strategists who are wondering why the Democrats are willing to run the risk of being seen as the bad guys and the bad girls shutting down government. We'll see how that goes. And then in a very different way in Canada, we see a coalition develop. This is the first time since the new government federally, since Prime Minister Carney won. The Conservatives and the NDP have voted together or put huge pressure on the government, and it's on an area to do with terrorism. There's a group known as the Bishnoi Gang. You may or may not have heard of them. They're maybe a little more active in Western Canada, but a nasty group, and they have their origins in the Punjab region in India. They do a lot of exporting of drugs, extortion. They've been responsible for a number of murders to finance their own political causes. And there's been a push. Other countries have labeled this group as terrorist. There's been a real push in Canada that this should be done, but the Liberals have been resisting it. It's an interesting preoccupation that Liberals have with really dragging their feet historically on designation of groups as terrorist groups. I can recall back in about 2003 when just after I was opposition leader, and we organized a lot of political forces, not just on the Hill, but around Canada, to get the Liberals to finally designate Hezbollah, which was a terrorist group designated by all other countries around the world, a vicious group operating mainly in Lebanon. And the Liberals dragged their feet on this for a number of years till finally the media started paying attention, put pressure on them, along with work that we were doing relative to the opposition. So there's this historical reluctance among the federal Liberals to designate terrorist groups as terrorist groups. Some people are speculating it cuts into some of their voter base in terms of certain constituencies where they don't want to risk losing a seat if there's a certain concentration of voters with certain backgrounds there. Whatever the reasons are, frustrating that it happens, but this is an interesting development. Conservatives and NDP getting together, forcing the Liberals to designate this group. We'll see if there's more of these coalition that develop. Keep in mind, for viewers outside of Canada, that the present federal government is a minority government, so they have to be a little bit careful about what items they can push and what they can't. They could risk a non-confidence vote. The area of confidence is something that we see developing in a different way. You've probably been aware and you've seen media reports of this flotilla, so-called. It's quite an array of vessels, and they say it's kind of like a citizens movement heading towards Israel. And this group is actually supported now. It's quite a large flotilla, supported by entire countries, not just various non-government organizations. Their intent, as they say, is to break the blockade that Israel puts on Gaza in terms of on the ocean, on the sea. And the ironic thing here is this blockade was set up by Israel in 2009, and the UN looked at the situation, and Israel was making the point that they were doing it to block military assistance and weapons coming into Israel, into Gaza via the sea. And Israel was able to make the case in 2009 at the United Nations that the blockade needed to be there to stop the encroachment of terrorist and military activity, and the UN approved it and has always put in place their approval for the blockade that is set up by Israeli naval and aviation forces. They have said that it is a legal blockade. This other force, this so-called citizens flotilla, is sailing. I guess they think they're going to break the blockade. I got some bad news for them. That's not usually how it goes down when you take on the Israeli military. But now a counter flotilla has started up, and one of the hostages, Emily Damara, who was released in January, she was horrifically abused and mistreated while in captivity by Hamas. She and some others have organized a counter flotilla. So it looks like we could be seeing the war of the flotillas out there in the Mediterranean. We'll see how it develops. It's going to be interesting as one flotilla sails toward the other, and we'll see if that results in some kind of a confrontation. In terms of confrontation, Hamas took a very bold step just this weekend in actually, and now nobody's denying this now, and actually firing on and attacking UN vehicles and paving crews that were and have been working on a road to South Gaza, so that citizens of Gaza and Gaza City who want to get out of the way of the ongoing development there, as Israeli forces are determined to go into Gaza and Gaza City and destroy all members of Hamas. So they're looking at, internationally, there have been efforts to look at how do we get citizens who can escape. Hamas does not want citizens to leave. They force them to stay in Gaza. They'll shoot them. They threaten them. But the UN has gone in there building this road to help them actually get out of Gaza and head to the southern part of Gaza. And Hamas armed vehicles firing on UN vehicles, paving this road. We'll see if that results in an awakening by people, even globally, that Hamas continues. They have two goals stated in their charter. One is the ongoing elimination of all Jews all the time, everywhere. And the second part of their charter is the eradication, the extinction of Israel. So keep in mind, Hamas has never advocated for a two-state solution, and now they are continually going against their own people in Gaza. We'll look at the developments there. And to do the flip side on that, in a major concert, you may or may not be aware of the Israeli rapper called The Shadow. He's quite well known. And he came out in one of his songs in his concert with almost like a memorial song to Charlie Kirk, who was assassinated last week. So it's interesting to see the various coalitions that develop, whether we're talking about flotillas or here we have an Israeli, a Jewish rapper praising a Christian who was assassinated. Fascinating development there. And if you want to really talk about an interesting development, you have to look at the announcement today by the NFL they're bringing in for the halftime show at the Super Bowl in February again, another rapper. You may or may not have heard of him, but he's huge. His name is Bad Bunny, and he has hopped onto the Super Bowl stage. Now, Bad Bunny is situated in Puerto Rico, and many of his songs, he's highly political, highly controversial, and taking a very dim view of the immigration clampdown by President Trump. He attacks that all the time, very attacking in terms of the ICE officials and others. So very much would be on all political sides a pretty radical opponent of any political views from the White House, from President Trump, especially related to immigration. And here we have the NFL is bringing him in as the part-time show, which is doubly interesting, as the halftime show, doubly interesting because as a matter of policy, this Bad Bunny does not tour in the U.S. That's part of his protest. Now he's going to be at the Super Bowl. Some people say, well, how well known is he? How big is he? Well, one of his main songs that really launched his career, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is Dakiti. That song, which he put out in 2020, has had 2 billion, count that, 2 billion views. Popular dude, coming to the NFL. Watch and enjoy, and we will see you tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in.